Joe!
If that line rings a bell, then you already know you're in for something special. Because Kelly's Heroes, 1970, isn't just another war movie. It's one of the most underrated classics ever put on screen. A wild mix of action, humor, rebellion, and one very unusual mission. And today, we're going deeper than ever before. We're uncovering behind-the-scenes secrets, casting surprises, hidden meanings, and real-world details that make this film even more fascinating than you remember. Some of these facts are strange, some are surprising, and one of them almost didn't make it into this video at all. Welcome to Rewatch Club, where every revisit reveals something new. Here are 20 jaw-dropping facts you've probably never heard. Let's saddle up. Number 1. Forget studio sets and polished backlots. Kelly's Heroes was filmed almost entirely in Yugoslavia, modern-day Croatia, especially around the Šibenik region. Director Brian G. Hutton didn't choose this location randomly. He wanted something Hollywood couldn't fake: real terrain, real atmosphere, and a place that still carried the visible marks of history. And he got exactly that. The production was granted full cooperation from the Yugoslav National Army, giving filmmakers access to real military vehicles, active soldiers, authentic locations untouched by modern rebuilding. Even more striking, some of the extras had actually lived through World War II themselves. That gritty realism you feel throughout the film isn't just good filmmaking, it's real history embedded into every frame. Number 2. One of the most unforgettable elements in the film is the massive tiger tank guarding the gold. There's just one problem. Real tiger tanks were basically unavailable by 1970. So what did the filmmakers do? They improvised. Using Soviet-built T-34 tanks, the crew redesigned them with modified structures to resemble German tigers. With clever camera work and editing, the illusion worked so well that audiences believed it for decades. It's movie magic at its finest. Simple, creative, and incredibly effective. If you're enjoying these hidden stories behind Kelly's Heroes, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe, because we've got even more surprising facts coming up that you definitely don't want to miss. Number 3. The loud, commanding General Colt was played by Carroll O'Connor. At the time of filming, he wasn't a household name, but just 1 year later, everything changed. In 1971, he became Archie Bunker in All in the Family, one of the most iconic characters in television history. Looking back, his performance in Kelly's Heroes feels like a preview of what was coming. The authority, the intensity, the presence, it was all already there. Audiences just hadn't caught on yet. Fact 4. Before becoming the friendly face of the Love Boat, Gavin MacLeod played Moriarty, one of the soldiers chasing gold. It's a dramatic contrast. Later, he would become known as Captain Steubing, calm and welcoming. But here, he's part of a rough, unpredictable crew operating in chaos. Seeing both roles side by side is almost surreal, and shows just how versatile he really was as an actor. Number 5. Donald Sutherland had an unbelievable year in 1970. While filming Kelly's Heroes, he had just wrapped MASH, where he played Hawkeye Pierce. Now, here's where it gets interesting. His character Oddball feels like a spiritual cousin to Hawkeye. Both question authority, both think differently from everyone else, both bring a unique energy into a rigid military world, whether intentional or not. Sutherland created two of the most memorable anti-establishment characters in film history almost simultaneously. That's not just impressive, that's legendary. Number 6. Donald Sutherland's character, Oddball, feels completely unique, and there's a reason for that. A lot of his most memorable dialogue, it wasn't written. Sutherland improvised many of Oddball's lines, leaning into the character's laid-back, free-thinking personality. Instead of sticking rigidly to the script, he brought his own rhythm, his own voice, and his own philosophy into the role. That now famous attitude about staying positive and avoiding negativity came directly from his interpretation of the character, not the page, and it worked. Because Oddball doesn't feel like a typical movie character. He feels real, unpredictable, and completely unforgettable. Number 7. Don Rickles was known as one of the sharpest insult comedians of all time. So when he was cast as Crap Game, audiences might have expected non-stop jokes. But that's not what happened. Instead, Rickles delivered a grounded, fast-talking, street-smart performance that added authenticity to the film. His character feels like someone who knows how to survive by thinking quickly and talking even faster. The humor is still there, but it's woven naturally into the role, not forced. And that's exactly why it works. Number 8. Before becoming the unforgettable Kojak, Telly Savalas played Big Joe. At this point in his career, he was already respected, but he hadn't yet reached that defining role that would make him a global name. That changed just a few years later. Looking back, you can clearly see the connection: strong presence, commanding authority. A character who owns every scene, Big Joe wasn't just another role. It was a preview of the legend he was about to become. Number 9. At first glance, Kelly's Heroes looks like a classic World War II film. But underneath, it's something completely different. This is actually a heist movie disguised as a war story. Think about it: a team of misfits, a risky plan, a massive reward, and impossible odds. Swap the battlefield for a city, and you've got something closer to Ocean's 11 than a traditional war film. And that's what makes it stand out. Because while other films focused on duty and heroism, this one quietly asked a different question: what are people really fighting for? Number 10. When the filmmakers approached the United States Army for support, they were turned down. Why? Because the story didn't exactly paint a traditional picture of military values. The idea of soldiers going after gold for personal gain instead of following orders wasn't something the Army wanted to be associated with. So the production had to look elsewhere. That's where Yugoslavia stepped in, providing equipment, manpower, and locations that made the film possible. It's a surprising twist: an American war film made possible by a foreign army during the Cold War. Sometimes reality is just as unexpected as the story on screen. Number 11. The screenplay was written by Troy Kennedy Martin, a name that might not immediately stand out, but it should. Years later, he created Edge of Darkness, widely considered one of the greatest British television dramas ever made. Even back in Kelly's Heroes, his style was already clear. He didn't want a simple war film. He didn't want a straightforward heist story. He wanted both layered together. A film that entertains on the surface while quietly saying something deeper underneath. And somehow, against the odds, that balance worked. Number 12. By 1970, Clint Eastwood wasn't just a rising star, he was becoming a major force in Hollywood. Coming off the success of the Dollars trilogy, he had real influence. And that influence mattered. At a time when the studio was hesitant, Eastwood's involvement helped push the project forward. His presence gave the film credibility and made it much easier to get the green light. On top of that, he negotiated a deal that included a percentage of the film's profits, which was still relatively uncommon at the time. But more importantly, he shaped the tone of the character Kelly: calm, calculated, always thinking ahead. A style that would define many of his roles for years to come. Number 13. While the movie tells a story about chasing gold, the studio making it was dealing with serious financial trouble. MGM, once one of Hollywood's biggest names, was going through a difficult period, cutting costs and selling off assets just to stay afloat. That made Kelly's Heroes a risky project. Filming overseas, large-scale action scenes, a long production schedule. But despite all that, the film performed well enough to become one of the brighter moments for the studio during a challenging time. Sometimes the biggest risks bring the biggest rewards. Number 14. Those large-scale battle sequences? They weren't created with camera tricks or a handful of extras. The production used thousands of real soldiers from the Yugoslav National Army. At times, over 1,000 uniformed troops were involved in a single sequence. And these weren't just background performers. They were trained soldiers operating with real discipline, real coordination, and real experience. Some had even lived through wartime conditions themselves. That level of authenticity is almost impossible to recreate, and it's a big part of why the film still feels so grounded today. Some had even lived through wartime conditions themselves. That level of authenticity is almost impossible to recreate, and it's a big part of why the film still feels so grounded today. Number 15. On the surface, the central idea in Kelly's Heroes feels like pure Hollywood invention. A group of soldiers in the middle of a war discovering a massive stash of gold and deciding to go after it instead of following orders. It sounds like a clean fictional setup designed purely for entertainment. But once you look a little closer at real history, that idea becomes far less imaginary than most people expect. Because during World War II, there were multiple real-world situations involving gold, valuables, and hidden assets being moved, lost, or deliberately concealed across Europe as front lines shifted and governments collapsed. Entire national treasuries were evacuated in panic. Private reserves were hidden in banks, tunnels, and remote locations. Some shipments were officially documented but never arrived at their destinations. Others simply vanished in the chaos of retreating armies and advancing forces. And in that confusion, something very unusual sometimes happened. Military personnel on both sides occasionally came across unexpected caches of valuables during operations. Not always large cinematic treasure vaults like in the film, but real discoveries of hidden currency, bullion, or abandoned reserves that had been left behind as institutions broke down. These moments created situations that were morally complicated in a way that's hard to simplify, because in a normal chain of command, soldiers are following orders, focused on strategy and survival. But in moments where something valuable is suddenly exposed, especially in the middle of collapsing infrastructure, the situation becomes psychologically different. It's no longer just about the mission, it becomes about choice. Do you report it immediately? Do you secure it and wait for instructions? Or do you ignore it entirely and move on? History doesn't always record these moments clearly, but accounts and wartime reports suggest that questions of captured or discovered wealth did arise in scattered, real incidents throughout the conflict. And that's where the connection to Kelly's Heroes becomes interesting. The film takes this fragmented historical reality and expands it into a single focused narrative. Instead of showing scattered events, it builds one clear scenario where the moral tension is impossible to ignore. Soldiers discovering something valuable while still in active wartime conditions and having to decide what it means in the context of duty. Survival and self-interest. What makes this even more compelling is that the story doesn't rely on fantasy logic. There are no supernatural elements, no impossible technology, no exaggerated fiction beyond the central premise itself. It's grounded in a very human question. When structure breaks down, what drives people more, loyalty to the system or personal opportunity? And that's why the idea feels believable, even decades later. Because even if the exact scenario is dramatized, the underlying tension is real. War has always created environments where normal rules become blurred, and decisions happen in gray areas rather than clear black and white choices. So when Kelly's Heroes presents the idea of soldiers encountering gold in the middle of conflict, it isn't pulling from pure imagination. It's amplifying something that has existed in various forms throughout history, moments where chaos, opportunity, and survival overlap in unpredictable ways. And that's what makes the concept so effective. It doesn't feel like something invented out of nowhere. It feels like something that could have happened even if history didn't record it in the same clean cinematic way. Number 16. If you've ever watched Kelly's Heroes and felt like the music doesn't quite match the World War II setting, that feeling is completely correct. But here's the key detail most viewers miss. It wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate creative choice. The score, shaped by Lalo Schifrin, and especially the standout track Burning Bridges performed by the Mike Curb Congregation, carries a very distinct late 1960s to early 1970s sound. It doesn't try to imitate the 1940s. It doesn't try to blend in with the historical setting at all. Instead, it does something far more intentional. It pulls the audience forward in time, and that decision changes everything about how the film feels. Because if the music had been strictly period accurate, big band, military marches, orchestral wartime cues, the film would sit firmly in the past. It would feel like a traditional historical war movie, something separated from the viewer by decades of distance. But that's not what the filmmakers wanted. They wanted the opposite effect. The modern-sounding music creates a kind of time clash on purpose. You're watching a story set in the 1940s, but the emotional tone of the soundtrack belongs to the world of 1970, the world the audience was actually living in when the film was released. That subtle mismatch does something very clever. It breaks the illusion of pure history and turns the film into something more immediate, more personal. It quietly suggests that even though the uniforms, weapons, and setting belong to World War II, the attitudes, humor, and motivations of the characters are meant to reflect something closer to modern life. In other words, the music acts like a bridge between eras. And that's where the song Burning Bridges becomes especially important. On the surface, it's a simple melodic track that plays over the film's opening and closing moments. But underneath, it reinforces the film's deeper theme, walking away from systems, leaving expectations behind, and choosing your own path instead of following traditional rules. That's why the sound doesn't feel historic. It feels reflective, almost like it belongs to the character's mindset rather than their time period. And over time, that choice has aged in a very interesting way. Because even today, decades later, you can still recognize that sound instantly. It doesn't blend into other war films. It doesn't get lost in cinematic trends. It stands apart. almost like a signature. And that's the real impact of the decision. The music doesn't just support the story, it defines how we emotionally interpret it. It keeps the film from feeling locked in the past and instead makes it feel like something that still connects to modern audiences in a subtle, almost subconscious way. So when something feels slightly off about the soundtrack, that's actually the point. It's not trying to transport you back to 1944. It's trying to keep you right where you are, while reminding you that the story at its core still speaks to people today.
Number 17.
Director Brian G. Hutton had an incredible run. Right before Kelly's Heroes, he directed Where Eagles Dare, another iconic World War II film starring Clint Eastwood. 2 back-to-back films, same star, same setting, both unforgettable. Hutton focused on realism, real locations, practical effects, minimal studio tricks, and that approach helped shape an entire style of war adventure films that audiences still love today. What's even more surprising, he didn't direct many films overall, but these 2 alone were enough to leave a lasting mark.
Number 18.
Most war films build toward one thing, a final battle, a heroic victory, a clear sense of right and wrong. Kelly's Heroes does something completely different. At the final moment, instead of fighting, Kelly negotiates. No dramatic speeches, no last stand, just a practical deal between enemies. They split the gold and walk away. For its time, this was incredibly bold. It challenged everything audiences expected from the genre. And that's exactly why it still stands out today. And before we roll into the next fact, if you're enjoying this deep dive so far, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let us know your favorite moment from the film in the comments. It really helps the channel grow and keeps these deep dives coming.
Number 19.
Looking back today, one of the most fascinating things about Kelly's Heroes isn't just the story, it's the people in it. Because this cast, it's stacked with names that would soon become legendary, but here's the twist. At the time of filming, most of them weren't stars yet. They were right on the edge. Take Carroll O'Connor, for example. In this film, he plays the loud, commanding General Colt. A strong performance, no doubt, but nothing that would hint at what was coming next. Just 1 year later, he would become Archie Bunker in All in the Family, a character that would completely redefine television and make him a household name across America. Then there's Gavin MacLeod, who appears here as Moriarty. A solid supporting role, but not yet the warm, familiar face audiences would come to love. That would change when he became Captain Stubing on the Love Boat, turning him into one of the most recognizable figures on TV. And of course, Telly Savalas. In Kelly's Heroes, he's already powerful, already commanding as Big Joe. You can feel the presence, but he hadn't yet stepped into the role that would define his career. That came later with Kojak, a character so iconic it became part of pop culture history. And then there's Harry Dean Stanton, a name that would go on to carry serious weight in Hollywood. At the time, just another face in the lineup. But in the years ahead, he would become one of the most respected and recognizable character actors in film history, known for bringing depth and authenticity to every role he touched. And here's what makes this so interesting. When you watch the film for the first time, none of this stands out. But when you come back to it years later, everything changes. Suddenly, every scene feels different. Every moment carries a little more weight, because now you're not just watching characters, you're watching future icons before they became icons. It's like looking at a snapshot in time right before everything changed. And that adds a whole new layer of appreciation to the film. Not just for what it is, but for what it quietly captured without even realizing it.
Number 20.
This one surprises almost everyone who hears it for the first time, because Kelly's Heroes isn't just talked about in film circles or among classic movie fans. It has also found its way into business schools, leadership seminars, and management training discussions. Yes, seriously. And the reason has almost nothing to do with war, gold, or action scenes. It comes down to one character, Oddball, played by Donald Sutherland. Now on the surface, Oddball looks like chaos wrapped in a tank crew uniform. He's unconventional, relaxed, and completely detached from the rigid structure of military thinking. He doesn't operate by traditional rules, and he doesn't try to force others into strict discipline. Instead, he does something far more unusual. He reframes everything. When others see danger, he looks for opportunity. When others feel pressure, he emphasizes calm. When others focus on limitations, he talks about possibilities. And that mindset, often summarized through his positive waves philosophy, has been used in leadership discussions as an example of how attitude and framing can influence group performance. Because here's the core idea that business educators pull from the character. In high-pressure environments, a leader's mindset doesn't just affect them, it spreads to everyone around them. And whether you're managing a team, leading a project, or making decisions under stress, the way information is framed can completely change how people respond to it. That's where Oddball becomes interesting outside of film. Not because he represents traditional leadership, but because he represents something more unconventional. The idea that morale, perspective, and communication style can sometimes matter just as much as structure and strategy. In leadership case studies, this is often used as a contrast point. On one side, rigid command and control systems. On the other, flexible, morale-driven approaches that rely on adaptability and psychological momentum. And Oddball sits right in the middle of that discussion, not as a textbook example, but as a cultural reference point that makes the idea easier to understand. But here's the part that really surprises people. This analysis isn't just academic. It shows how a film character, written for entertainment, can accidentally reflect real principles about human behavior in teams. Because whether you're in a classroom, a boardroom, or a fictional battlefield chasing gold, people respond to energy, they respond to confidence, and they respond to how situations are framed. So even though Oddball is surrounded by humor, absurdity, and a very unusual tank, the idea behind him is taken seriously in unexpected places, and that's what makes this fact so fascinating. A character designed to entertain ended up being used to explain how real-world leadership sometimes works. And once you notice that connection, you stop seeing him as just part of a movie and start seeing him as part of a bigger conversation about how people think and act under pressure.
Bonus.
Now for the bonus fact. The song Burning Bridges, performed by the Mike Curb congregation, became one of the most recognizable elements of the film. But what happened next is something very few people know. Mike Curb, the musician behind the group, later became the Lieutenant Governor of California. Yes, really. From creating music for a film about soldiers chasing gold to holding one of the highest political offices in the state. It's an unexpected journey and one of the most unusual connections to come out of the film. Kelly's Heroes isn't just a war movie. It's a story about choices, about people stepping outside the system even just once to chase something of their own. It blends action, humor, and meaning in a way that still feels fresh decades later. And maybe that's why it continues to hold up, because underneath everything, it's not really about war, and it's not really about gold. It's about people. If you made it this far, you're officially part of the crew. Now tell us in the comments, which moment stood out to you the most? Was it Oddball's philosophy, the final negotiation, or something else entirely? And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more breakdowns just like this, because the next great rewatch might be your idea.